Welcome to our webinar series sponsored by the Lutyens Trust America and the Lutyens Trust. On our panel today, we're fortunate to have Katherine Mills and Katherine Mills from the UK National Trust. They'll be sharing some of the special finds from their research on Munstead Wood. I'm Robin Prater, and the Executive Director of the Lutyens Trust America, and along with Marcos Lutyens, our chair, will be hosting today. So I'm imagining that many of you watching your first introduction to Sir Edwin Lutyens may have been through Munstead Wood. I know mine was. Of course, when Lutyens designed the house, he certainly wasn't a Sir, and he had in fact barely begun his career as a distinguished architect. But the roots of all of his subsequent design work are deep within Munstead Wood and his partnership with Gertrude Jekyll. During our LTA tour last autumn, our group was privileged to be able to meet with Katherine and Caroline and to see Munstead Wood as it's changing from a private home to a National Trust property. Thank you for that. Katherine Mills is the General Manager of the National Trust Munstead Wood, the historic home and garden of Gertrude Jekyll in Surrey. With over 15 years experience at the Trust, she leads the team responsible for caring for the house and garden, while also spearheading community engagement projects in collaboration with local partners. Katherine is also leading the future plans for Munstead Wood, including restoration efforts and public access, as well as long-term sustainability. With a bachelor's in political philosophy and master's in management theory and a decade of experience in fashion retail and operations, Katherine brings a strong commercial perspective to her role. She now channels that expertise into her passion for heritage, especially historic gardens. Dr. Katherine Mills is a curator at the National Trust covering Munstead Wood, Standon, and Nymans. She has an MA in History of Art from the University of Aberdeen and an MA in Garden History from Birkbeck College. And her PhD thesis examined John Ruskin's garden at Brantwood. Caroline has previously worked in museums and for the Gardens Trust, and her research interest lies broadly in 19th century art, architecture, and gardens. She is author of The Victorian Garden, The Victorian Gardener, The Kitchen Garden, and is currently working on a new monograph on Victorian gardens to be published by Bloomsbury and the National Trust. Caroline has written for the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, Garden History, Furniture History, Journal of the Decorative Arts Society, Museum Journal, and various other publications, and was awarded the Mavis Beatty Essay Prize in 2022. Look for her article on Gertrude Jekyll's Decorative Arts and Munstead Wood in the autumn issue of the Decorative Arts Journal. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Lutyens Trust America website and on our YouTube channel. So please put any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer as many as time permits at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn over to Caroline and Katherine for our presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Robin. We are delighted to be here today, so we really appreciate you inviting us. You've done such a beautiful introduction, but I will be speaking first. I'm Katherine, I'm the General Manager for Munstead Wood, and then I'll be handing over to Caroline in due course. Next slide, please, Robin. So before I speak about Munstead Wood, I think it's worth just giving a brief introduction to the National Trust as a whole. Some of you may know us, some of you may not know us at all. The National Trust was founded 130 years ago by three people who were concerned with the rapid industrialisation that was threatening to sweep away Britain's heritage and destroy its remaining natural landscapes. The charity was founded to give people, especially city dwellers, access to peaceful natural landscapes and places of great beauty. Today, the National Trust is the largest conservation charity in Europe. There are over 5.4 million members and a staff and volunteer team of nearly 55,000 people. The breadth of places we care for is extraordinary, from the home of Winston Churchill to the small manor where Isaac Newton developed his theory on gravity, to the terraced houses that were the childhood homes of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and even the White Cliffs of Dover. Thanks to the vision and wisdom of our three founders, the National Trust now looks after over 1 million works of art and objects, 620,000 acres of countryside, 780 miles of coastline, 500 historic places, 11 lighthouses, and even 39 pubs. Next slide, please, Robin. I think it's helpful to just explain a little bit about how the National Trust goes about acquisitions. We sort of have three types of acquisition in the National Trust, and you can see them on your screen right now. So the first of those is on a fairly regular basis, we acquire objects. And you can see an example of that right there, which is Angelica Kaufmann's Penelope in Euryclea, which was returned to Stourhead in 2023. The second type of acquisition that we do on a slightly less regular basis, but still fairly regularly, is that we acquire land. And actually on your screen there, you can see a woodland that was 130 acres that we acquired at Poleston Lacey in 2022. Very, very occasionally, we acquire property, hence Munstead Wood. Now, all the properties in the National Trust have an accession or an acquisition policy, and this identifies the land and the objects that property might want to acquire if the opportunity arises. And the Poleston example is a really nice one of this. The land was on our acquisition plan for the estate. It was part of a site of special scientific interest where we already managed half of it, so it made sense to look after the other half. But for places that we don't own, we do need to have a set of principles that help us to make well-considered choices. We are a charity and we can't acquire everything. So when we do bring places into our care, we need to think about it really carefully. So first and foremost, the property must be of national importance because of its outstanding natural beauty or its natural or historic interest. The ownership by the trust should increase benefits to the nation, and such benefit is for future generations as well as our own. The property should also normally be under threat in some form. So, threat is defined as a situation in which the National Trust's protection can help avoid things like deterioration, demolition, or alteration, or development that would be harmful to its character. We also want to make sure that we are the most appropriate owner for any property that we do acquire. So make sure we have the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to meet the particular needs of the property. And in addition, we consider the financial implications. Do we think it will be possible to make the property financially self-supporting? Typically, this means it should come with a substantial endowment to support it. And in fact, actually, normally these days, properties are given to us as an acquisition as a gift, and we only accept them if then they come with a substantial endowment to support the long-term care. It is extremely unusual for us to purchase a house with no visible means of support. Next slide, please. Now, the Trust already has some significant examples of Lutyens and Jekyll heritage, and on your screen you can see Barrington Court, which was a Jekyll-designed garden. You've got Lindisfarne, which of course was a glorious collaboration between Lutyens and Jekyll. You've got Hatchlands that has a Jekyll-designed rose garden, that's the one with the horse in the middle. You've got Castle Drogo, and of course the lodge houses at Runnymede, also designed by Lutyens. Next slide, please. So why acquire more? Why buy Munstead Wood? Well, Munstead Wood is one of Lutyens' earliest designs. It's relatively in touch, and the house is full of Lutyens' original features and helps us to understand the evolution of his style. Furthermore, if you looked at the National Trust collection right now, you'd pretty much think that all Lutyens ever did was build castles. There are hardly any domestic Lutyens buildings in public ownership. Goddard's is a lovely example in Surrey, but the reality is the majority remain as private residences. On top of that, there's the Jekyll side. Of the 400 gardens that Gertrude Jekyll designed, there is only one that she designed for herself, and it's Munstead Wood. She gardened here for nearly 50 years. It is the clearest expression of her ideas and her principles and the living canvas of her life's work. This was her home. It was the place where she experimented and tested ideas. It was the inspiration for her writing, and in many ways, it was the greatest love of her life. If there is anywhere to tell the Jekyll story, it's Munstead Wood. And as a woman who fundamentally changed how we garden, that story needs to be told, and her legacy deserves to be celebrated. So, despite Munstead Wood being put on the open market for a considerable sum and coming with no endowment at all, the National Trust used its own money to purchase the property with help from His Majesty's government. On the 21st of April 2023, the contracts were signed and Munstead Wood was saved. Next slide, please, Robin. I think it's fair to say that there are few homes and even fewer gardens in our care where the owner has been so deeply involved in the making. Jekyll oversaw all aspects of the making of Munstead Wood. It was designed entirely to her specification and to suit how she wanted to live her life. When Jekyll bought the land in 1882, it was just 15 acres of heathland, woodland, and farmland. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given what we know now, Jekyll started with the garden. Indeed, the garden was laid out long before the house was built. Now, of course, as you all know very well, Gertrude Jekyll met Edwin Lutyens in 1889. They were kindred spirits. And for such an important project, her own home, Jekyll chose an architect whose principles aligned with her own. The process was a true collaboration, with both parties contributing to all aspects of the home, and Lutyens designing the formal garden for Jekyll next to the house. Drawing on vernacular style and craft tradition, but injected with Lutyens' modernity and genius, it appears timeless and speaks of Surrey. The designing and building of Munstead Wood strengthened their relationship. They went on to collaborate on over 100 garden projects together, combining their skills to create an unsurpassed creative partnership which boosted both their careers. Next slide, please. Has the making of a home and garden ever had such a profound impact on two people? This collaboration represents a pivotal moment on both Jekyll and Lutyens' creative journeys, acting as a catalyst in their respective professions. Whilst not their first collaboration, having worked together on Chinthurst House, it clearly cemented the partnership. For Jekyll, the move to Munstead Wood represented a fully independent life which she seems to have embraced wholeheartedly, and her career as a garden writer and designer progresses rapidly from this point onwards. For the much younger Lutyens, Munstead Wood was a place of experimentation, a chance to try out new ideas with a client who was equally passionate about craftsmanship, quality, beauty, and utility. The result is a home that feels rooted in the landscape, a cottage in the woods purposefully designed for one woman. But for Jekyll and Lutyens, it was so much more. It was a place of inspiration, a shining example of the power of two creative individuals, both alike, but also different, coming together. Jekyll would go on to garden at Munstead Wood for over 50 years, trying different ideas and developing the garden. Lutyens would repeat elements of his Munstead design again and again, especially in his domestic architecture. Indeed, the lessons learnt at Munstead Wood influenced both individuals for the rest of their lives. Next slide. The start of Jekyll's writing largely coincides with the purchase of the land that becomes her home, Munstead Wood. Of over 1,000 articles written by Jekyll, just 19 were published before 1882. Her first book, Wood and Garden, was published in 1899, 3 years after the house was completed. The making of the garden seems to have fueled her desire to write, and write she did. Over the 50 years that she was writing, she published on average a piece a fortnight for 50 years, right up until her death, aged 89. In fact, in the year of her death, she published 30 pieces of writing, some of them just short gardening notes, but nevertheless, she was certainly keeping going. Alongside this, she wrote 14 books and contributed to many others, nearly 50, working at a rate of one book a year from 1899. So she was a prolific writer and hugely influential, and this was how our ideas spread and her reputation grew. Next slide. Jekyll certainly had a talent for communication. Her writing was full of inspirational ideas, but also practical advice. She was authoritative, but friendly, an amateur gardener writing for other amateur gardeners. And unlike many of the great garden landscape designers before her, you didn't need hundreds of acres for a Jekyll garden. All you needed was a window box. As an early practitioner of photography, and we believe one of the first women to take photographs specifically for publication, Jekyll used her images to illustrate her books and her articles. And she didn't just do this for herself. She supplied images to her friend William Robinson for his best-selling book, The English Flower Garden. With a darkroom created at Munstead Wood, located just off her workshop, the photographs are an extraordinary visual record of Munstead Wood and bring to life her home and garden in a way that words alone never could. Next slide. The writing and publishing would be a full-time job for most people, but for Jekyll, no, not enough. She also designed over 400 gardens in her lifetime. She began producing plans for friends and family, and then through word of mouth, she was asked to design for others, mainly in Britain, but also in Europe and America. Often she was working alongside an architect who designed the house and the formal gardens that Jekyll then provided the planting plans for. The majority of these collaborations were with Lutyens, but she also worked with Foisy, Lorimer, Bailey Scott, and many others. But Jekyll designed many gardens as well from scratch. And to ensure there was a ready supply of plants, she was the ones that she was specifying in her designs. She also established a plant nursery at Munstead Wood and offered a complete package to her clients with garden designs and plants. Quite the entrepreneurial enterprise, but also a growing business to manage and run. Now, it wasn't just that Jekyll was designing a large number of gardens and communicating her ideas, she was also sharing a new approach to gardening, working with nature and using drifts of colour. With Jekyll, gardening becomes art. So I'm delighted to hand over to Caroline to speak more about this.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello, everyone. So picking up on this idea of Jekyll as the artist gardener, which is what she referred to herself as, she saw gardening as a branch of the visual arts. It was an extension of her interest in fine and decorative art, not something separate to it. And I think this arts and crafts approach is really at the heart of everything that she was doing at Munstead Wood. And we need to understand her art to understand her gardening. So what I'm going to do is to look a bit more specifically at some of the decorative and structural details created by Lutyens and Jekyll at Munstead Wood. But first I wanted to spend just a bit of time exploring Jekyll's arts and crafts approach, which she was applying to all aspects of her life and interests, from her gardening and her decorative art to her conservation. So going back here to Jekyll's early days, this is a sketch of her by her friend Mary Newton. Sorry, just that one over on there. Thank you.
Sorry.
So this is a sketch of Jekyll when she was just 19. So one of my favorite images of her, actually looking at her when she's young and absorbed in her art. And this portrait was drawn while the two women were traveling together in Greece. And Jekyll was a frequent traveler in her youth. She was going to France, Switzerland, Italy, as well as further afield to Algiers with another friend, the artist Barbara Bodichon. And Jekyll had trained as an artist herself at the National Art School in South Kensington in London, and she was having some success exhibiting her paintings. She clearly enjoyed painting animals. You can see an example of one of her horse paintings. And incidentally, painting horses is something that she had in common with Lutyens' father. But she was also accepting commissions for animal paintings and for paintings from other people. And she was producing landscapes in oil and watercolour, depicting scenes at home and abroad. And she was copying old masters in the National Gallery and paintings by Turner, as many young artists were. But her hopes of becoming an artist were dashed by her progressively deteriorating eyesight. And she was in fact advised by her doctors to give up painting. Can we have the next one, please, Robin? And she might have given up exhibiting her paintings, but she certainly didn't give up painting. I don't think she was the sort of person to have responded to being told what to do in that manner anyway. And she was absorbed in many branches of the decorative arts, both in design and making. And she was seemingly curious to learn about and to master craft skills, which enabled her to design for many different materials, just as William Morris was doing at the same time. And Jekyll produced embroidery designs for the Royal School of Needlework. You can see an example there at the top left. And the photograph on the right was published in Jekyll's book Home and Garden with the caption, "Some Products of the Workshop." So here we see an example of the variety of crafts that Jekyll was producing. She's showing there examples of her wood carving, inlay work, silver repoussé, embroidery and jewellery making. She was also skilled in gesso work, in collage, gilding, and flower arranging. And we can see here also an example of one of her shell pictures. And at the bottom there, this is one of her designs for wallpaper. And the next one, please, Robin. And Jekyll was employing these many skills in interior schemes, first off for friends, but also for some pretty prestigious clients, including the Duke of Westminster, for whom she designed a series of 13 embroidered panels for his magnificent new home at Eaton Hall in Cheshire. And these were worked by the Royal School of Needlework under her supervision. The image on the left shows these lavish interiors at Eaton Hall, and you can just about make out their Jekyll's panels around the walls. And the inset image shows one of those panels closer up, and these do survive, although the house itself has now been demolished. The image we see on the right there is of her friends Leonie and Jack Blumenthal's house at Hyde Park Gate in London, where Jekyll was responsible for the stencil decoration on the walls, as well as some textiles and inlay work. And this was done by her in the 1870s. And it's becoming really clear to us now the extent to which Jekyll was involved in interior design for many different clients. It was a little business that she was running there, flourishing in those early years. And it's also interesting, when I'll show you some photographs of Munstead Wood in a moment, that this sort of opulent interior decoration that she was designing for other people is really a world away from the interiors of her own home. So the next one, please. And Jekyll was also a collector. She described herself as a person of accumulative proclivity, which is perhaps something many of us can relate to. She had a large collection of pewter, which you can see here displayed on the sideboard at Munstead Wood, and Lutyens had designed this sideboard for her. The pewter Jekyll reluctantly sold during the First World War, when she had to raise funds at a time of financial difficulty. And the Lutyens sideboard as well has also vanished without trace. At the bottom right of the screen there, you can see one of Jekyll's photographs of 3 rushlight holders. And this formed part of her collection of household items that she picked up in Surrey cottages. And this idea of recording vernacular architecture, cottage furnishings, tools, and dress was very important to Jekyll. Since childhood, she'd been exploring the Surrey lanes and meeting local cottagers and craftspeople, making friends with blacksmiths and carters and woodsmen. And this, of course, was an interest that she shared with Lutyens, and a common bond on which I think their friendship was firmly based. But as Jekyll grew older, she saw this regional character of her beloved West Surrey becoming diluted as the county opened up to newcomers through the coming of the railways. And she wrote a book, Old West Surrey, published in 1904. And this was really her attempt to preserve these traditions through descriptions and photographs. And the book contains over 300 of her own photographs, many of them showing items from her own collection, which she built up as she travelled the county. Jekyll gave this collection to the Surrey Archaeological Society in 1907, and it was displayed locally at Guildford Museum from 1911, and many of these pieces are actually still on display in the museum there today. Shortly after that, in 1916, she gave around 70 items of textiles from her collection to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And these were things collected by her at home and when travelling. And there's an example I'm showing at the top there of a beaded parasol that she collected in Italy. And I think her gifts to the museums would, of course, ensure the long-term preservation of her collections. But they were also, I think, an example of her generosity of spirit and her desire to share these collections with many other people. So to the next one, please. And I think all these things together, the art and the design, the making, the collecting, the concern over conserving tradition, the learning of new skills, and this generosity of spirit, these are all bound up in the arts and crafts ethos that underpinned Jekyll's life at Munstead Wood. And she and Lutyens, as Katherine said, were clearly kindred spirits. Munstead Wood is a collaboration of ideas, realised through Lutyens' skill as an architect, but founded, I think, on Jekyll's ideal of home. The house has echoes of the traditional buildings of the area, yet it's entirely modern. It's full of character, yet it's also unassuming, and it nestles into the landscape where it seems to belong. Indeed, Jekyll said of the house that it had taken to itself the soul of a more ancient dwelling place, which I think is a really lovely way of putting it. So moving to the next one, please, and now moving on to look inside the house. And as well as the material evidence in the house itself, there are various archive sources that reveal both Jekyll's tastes and her inspiration. Illustrated here on the right is a page from a scrapbook in the collection of the Royal Horticultural Society, which Jekyll has gathered and stuck in all sorts of bits of paper, just scraps of designs for decorative details, for pieces of jewellery. There's ornamental carvings in there, embroidery, mosaics, monograms, as well as sketches of great houses such as Berkeley Castle, which is at the top of the page there. And this example is one of 180 pages packed with these little scraps of inspiration. And some of these I've managed to trace back to decorative details at Munstead Wood. Next to the scrapbook, in the centre of the screen there, is a page from one of Jekyll's photograph albums. And these are in the collection of the Environmental Design Archives at the University of California, Berkeley. And there are 6 albums at Berkeley containing among them thousands of photographs. And these albums are such a valuable record of Jekyll's work. Next to that, on the left of the screen, is the image that we've just looked at of the products of Jekyll's workshop, and another photograph there that she published showing even more details of her decorative artwork. And these published and unpublished photographs are mostly of the garden and of plants, but amongst them are a few like these ones that can really help us understand Jekyll's design and making, as well as her interiors at Munstead Wood. And she also gives us some descriptions in her published writing, including a very useful chapter in her book Home and Garden called How the House Was Built. And this gives us various hints of her working relationship with Lutyens. The next one, please, Robin. So staying with this photograph that we were looking at there, some of the items designed and made by Jekyll do still survive. And this inlaid panel, which is depicted in Jekyll's photograph, is now incorporated into the fabric of Munstead Wood as the door to a corner cabinet in her sitting room, which we're looking at there on the right. Now, this is a very accomplished piece of bone inlay for an amateur artist, and it has a small sticker on the reverse that suggests it might have been exhibited at some point, and that sticker is at the lower edge of the screen there. And we have more examples. If we move on, please, Robin. Here we're looking at the door to Jekyll's workshop. This is the only internal door in the house to differ from Lutyens' design that are used around all the other rooms. And this suggests, I think, the significance of the room beyond. The inlay work, we're assuming it's Jekyll's own work, but the design of the door appears to have been conceived in collaboration with Lutyens, as the sketch in the centre here is among Lutyens' papers that are stored at the Royal Institute of British Architects, the RIBA. And the escutcheon on the door also appears to be Lutyens' design, although the design of the handle, as you can see, has been modified slightly from his original sketch shown below, and there's a little piece of metalwork missing. The next one, please. And we're looking at here some more examples of Jekyll's handwork that we have at Munstead Wood. Going around them there at the top is another inlaid panel, this time with mother of pearl as well as bone or ivory. And this one is incorporated into a corner cupboard in her book room. Next to that is the carved door to the wine cellar at Munstead Wood, the only example I've seen of Jekyll's wood carving, and appropriately there with a design of grapes. Next to that are the tiles on the wall of the flower shop, which is a little room between the workshop and the garden where Jekyll brought her cut flowers and arranged them for her house. And I think it's very likely that Jekyll designed and made these tiles herself. I've been looking for sources for their design, and there's nothing in the scrapbook, but she may have seen similar designs in museum collections or perhaps when travelling abroad. Below the tiles is one of 2 gesso panels above fireplaces, which both feature cats, of which Jekyll herself was very fond. And the style of these panels is based on 16th century decorative plasterwork. Jekyll was clearly inspired from examples she'd seen elsewhere. The design is similar to the decoration of the binding of Jekyll's book Home and Garden, what we saw a glimpse of in Catherine's slides earlier. And this design also features in Jekyll's scrapbook, illustrating how she could adapt her designs for different materials and media. The final little image there at the bottom shows one of the 5 keys in the cupboards in the gallery, each slightly different. And I think these are also likely to be Jekyll's work. We understand that she had some sort of forge, a blacksmith's forge in the yard at Munstead Wood, where she was making tools to her own specifications. And she describes also in her books and letters how she was learning decorative metalworking techniques. And I think the survival of these keys in the house really is remarkable. So these are some examples of Jekyll's design and handwork, which we have now embedded into the fabric of the building at Munstead Wood. So I'd like to move on now to look at how Jekyll was furnishing her house. And I should say here that we don't have any of these original furnishings in the house now. Nothing's left apart from these fixtures and fittings that we've seen. However, we have been able to piece together an idea of how the house was originally furnished from the few items of furniture that remain in private and museum collections, and also by analysing written descriptions and historic photographs, as well as the Munstead Wood sale catalogue of 1948. And this was the year the house finally left Jekyll family ownership, a full 16 years after Jekyll's death. And this was when much of the contents of the house was sold. There's also some valuable evidence of the furnishings that can be gleaned from the architectural plans of the house, which are now, as I've said, at the RIBA in London. And this plan that we're looking at here is Lutyens' ground floor plan of Munstead Wood, dated 1896. And I hope that you might just be able to make out in the drawings those little pencil marks showing the position of the furniture in some of the rooms and little annotations in the margin. And if we go on to the next one, Robin, I'm just showing a close-up of one of those rooms that labelled by Lutyens the hall, but Jekyll simply called it her sitting room. And hopefully you can make out here the layout of some of these movable furnishings sketched in pencil. And this is largely confirmed by the visual evidence and photographs. So these pencil markings do seem to be an accurate representation of where the furniture ended up. And it's lovely to see that these pencil marks show both Jekyll and Lutyens' handwriting, and some of it is upside down. So I think we can justifiably picture the two of them sitting with their heads together over a table with these plans, discussing how the dimensions of the rooms might accommodate Jekyll's furniture, how the furniture might best be arranged, and then jotting all this down on the plans. And moving to the next one, please. This is a view of the sitting room that was published in Country Life in 1900. And it gives us a really good illustration of Jekyll's taste in simple, heavy oak Jacobean type furniture and plain lime-washed walls. Her taste was, I think, very particular. Her simple furnishings were largely inspired by the interiors of cottages, reflecting her interest in tradition and utility. And certainly in an era of patterned wallpaper, of heavy drapes and overstuffed armchairs, this style of decoration was definitely out of the ordinary. But it's unclear how involved Lutyens was in the interior decoration and furnishing of the house. Jekyll seems to have accumulated much of the furniture before the house was built, and it's likely, I think, that she was very much in charge of the furnishing. The photographs I'm showing here on the right are from Jekyll's book Old West Surrey that I mentioned earlier, and I hope you can make out the same items of furniture towards the left of the main image, the mahogany chair and the little three-legged side table. And also the chimney crane apparatus in the image at the top is shown, I hope you can make it out there, in the fireplace within the hearth. And this illustrates how Jekyll was living with and using her collections in the house. And the next one, please, Robin. And this shows how she was also filling her house with pieces of her own making and design. The metalwork casket that I've circled there on the table to the right of the photograph looks likely to be something from Jekyll's workshop. I showed a photograph earlier of a similar box that's featured in Jekyll's photograph album, and the design from her scrapbook shown here at the top right seems also to relate to this piece or something very similar. And in the photograph below that, showing the inlaid panels, the two inlaid panels showed in that photograph, also appear to be incorporated into another piece of furniture that you can just get a glimpse of under the stairs there. And looking closely, it appears that this is a double-fronted cabinet on a stand. And the current whereabouts of this cabinet are unknown, but I do hope that this very distinctive piece of furniture might one day come to light. Moving on again, please, Robin. Another key source for Jekyll's furnishings is this sketch by Mary Lutyens, who had presumably accompanied her father on a visit to see Aunt Bumps, as they called Jekyll. And this, together with another sketch showing the other side of the room, are now in the collection at Godalming Museum, just down the road from Munstead Wood. And the museum dates this drawing to 1933, when Mary was about 25, but I think they must be earlier, as they clearly seem to show juvenile work. But the detail of the sketches does seem to be extremely accurate when compared with the furniture marked on the plans and with the Country Life photograph. The little wooden chair that I've circled in the centre of the drawing, together with another just to the left of it, correspond with a photograph of a chair in Jekyll's album that's captioned Majorca chair, lemon wood, seated with string. And that's the image on the top right. And this chair does seem to be rather diminutive in size, just as Mary Lutyens has drawn them. And the rush-seated ladder-back chairs, typical of cottage furniture, appear at various places around the house at Munstead Wood. Here you can see one that I've circled just next to the door at the left of the drawing. The next one, please, Robin. And these two cabinets on stands, shown against the back wall, are perhaps less typical of cottage furnishings, but were popular in late 19th century interiors where marquetry and lacquer cabinets like this were often combined with traditional English oak furniture. And the image on the right that we're looking at here is ostensibly one of Jekyll's photographs of a branch from the garden, but the furniture that she's used to prop it up with here gives us a good idea of some of her grander furnishings. And the sale catalogue lists various pieces of lacquer furniture and japanned furniture in the dining room and the main bedroom at Munstead Wood. And the next one, please, shows us here Mary Lutyens' other sketch, showing the northern wall, so the other side of the sitting room. And you can clearly see the other of Jekyll's two mahogany chairs depicted here just beneath the photograph, together with ceramics displayed on the wall. So another lovely image of the house as it was in Jekyll's day. So moving on to the next one, please, Robin, and moving upstairs now to the gallery where Katherine is now sitting. And this has windows overlooking the formal garden designed by Lutyens. And this is another of the photographs from Country Life. And this gallery is mentioned in a description by Elizabeth Lutyens, who stayed for a few months at Munstead Wood in 1933, so not long after Jekyll's death. And she writes of this visit that we adored it. It was dark and cool, with long galleries overlooking the wonderful garden, large rooms and quiet corners, the whole house redolent of wood burning, potpourri and furniture polish. So a lovely evocative description. And the gallery, as you can see, was uncarpeted and simply furnished with oak linen chests. The one you can just see on the left was illustrated by Jekyll in Old West Surrey. That's the photo on the top right. And this is a chest that appears again in several of Jekyll's photographs as a suitable prop for her flower arrangements, as you can see there in the photograph below. And again, some of these ladder-back chairs that we looked at before are shown against the wall under the windows here. The next one, please. So showing again this photograph of the sideboard Lutyens designed that I mentioned earlier. And we've got no further evidence of this piece of furniture beyond this photograph and a short description in the sale catalogue. But I do hope that this important piece by Lutyens survives somewhere. All the evidence that remains of its presence at Munstead Wood is its outline on the painted floor that you can see to the right there. Lutyens also designed a bed for Jekyll that was listed in the sale catalogue as a carved and panelled oak bedstead. So again, I'm hoping that this piece might turn up one day. The next one, please, Robin. And perhaps the most well-known and now ubiquitous piece of furniture designed by Lutyens was also present at Munstead Wood. His garden bench that was designed for Little Thacombe in West Sussex in 1902 appears in photographs of the North Court at Munstead Wood from the early 20th century. And the image published in Country Life in 1900, that's at the top of the screen there, shows a different form of garden bench positioned at the top of the steps. But by the time Gardens for Small Country Houses by Jekyll and Lawrence Weaver was published in 1912, there was a Lutyens bench occupying the same position below Jekyll's Swags of Clematis, as you can see in the photograph there at the bottom left. The bench is illustrated again in Weaver's Houses and Gardens of E.L. Lutyens, shown in the centre, and the distinctive ripple-moulded paving of the courtyard confirms that this photograph was taken at Munstead Wood. And there's an undated photograph also from Jekyll's album on the right there that confirms the positioning. So even in the years after Munstead Wood was built and furnished, Lutyens does seem to be clearly still involved in the furnishing and aesthetic choices, and that changes were being made through Jekyll's lifetime. So the next one, please. Now moving to look in more detail at some of the fixtures and fittings at Munstead Wood, which the evidence suggests were designed collaboratively by Jekyll and Lutyens. And I'm starting here with the bell pull at the front door. And this is a lovely example of the attention paid to even the smallest details. And this tiny sketch from Jekyll's scrapbook, shown in the centre, matches the profile of the bell pull. And visitors still have the pleasure of pulling this handle to announce their arrival at Munstead Wood today. Next one, please. The profile of the fireplace in the sitting room also features in Jekyll's scrapbook, marked up with the materials exactly as they appear today. And what's not clear is whether this is a design by Jekyll of her proposed fireplace or a sketch done afterwards of the actual fireplace. And the brick detailing that you can see in the modern photograph there in the hearth was added in, we think, the 1970s or 80s to reduce the size of the hearth. And this rather disrupts the clean lines of the profile envisaged by Jekyll and Lutyens that you see so clearly in the sketch there. And this is an intervention that we'll probably look to remove to try to return the fireplace to its original form as Jekyll and Lutyens knew it. The next one, please. So now the staircase, this is another feature, original feature by Lutyens, and the finials on the balustrade make an appearance in Jekyll's scrapbook too. The sketch, which I'm showing here in the centre, I'm afraid it's rather fuzzy as it's really tiny, so I've had to zoom in to try and get some detail. But there does definitely seem to be a relationship between this sketch and the finial at the top of the stairs, which I'm showing next to it here on the right. And you can see that the finials are all different. The caption in Jekyll's scrapbook is not entirely clear, but there is a reference to Munstead Wood that does seem to connect the two, suggesting that Jekyll was clearly involved in the design of the staircase. And the next one, please, Robin. When we compare Munstead Wood to other houses Lutyens designed shortly afterwards, at least some of these finials seem to share a typology, and I think there are other examples in Lutyens' work beyond Deanery Garden, which I'm showing here, and Goddard's. And what I'm wondering is whether the genesis of this idea can be found in Jekyll's scrapbook, and whether there are other features recognised as typical of Lutyens' work that we can trace back with some confidence to Jekyll. So the next one, please, Robin. And just to show another feature from Munstead Wood that's used again by Lutyens in other houses, and that's this wide corridor or gallery on the first floor. And we can see Munstead Wood Gallery to the left, but you can see the marked similarities with the distinctive beams at Deanery Garden there in the middle. And the range of windows along one side is also very like Munstead Wood. And this is a feature that surfaces again slightly later at Lindisfarne, shown on the right. And although this was, of course, an adaptation of an earlier building, it has the same quality of space and light that Lutyens first achieved at Munstead Wood. The gallery is lined along one side with cupboards for Jekyll to store her vast collections of textiles and other things. And the house was clearly designed by Lutyens to meet Jekyll's exacting requirements. This is evident too in the layout of the house, with a large workshop where Jekyll did her writing, garden design and decorative artwork, and a darkroom situated in the cellar below. Moving to the next one, please, Robin. And this image shows part of that workshop, and you get a sense here of the clutter of Jekyll's working environment. This is definitely a working space, but there are also lots of shelves for displaying collections, so Jekyll had inspiring objects all around her. And I'm going to finish here with just a little mystery. The distinctive log basket in the hearth is a traditional log carrier, which would have been worn on the back with shoulder straps. And I was recently in the Swiss Alps, and in fact, I saw some of these next to wood stacks outside chalets, so they're clearly still in use. Now, this is exactly the kind of useful and well-designed object that would have attracted Jekyll, so there's no surprise to see it here at Munstead Wood. But what is puzzling is the fact that what appears to be exactly the same log carrier is now in the collection up at Lindisfarne Castle, which was remodeled by Lutyens in 1901 for his and Jekyll's mutual friend, Edward Hudson. The log carrier from Lindisfarne, I'm showing it down there at the bottom right. And there are also historic photographs of it in the ship room at Lindisfarne, so it was definitely there historically. So the mystery is why and how and when did this piece of furniture travel from Munstead Wood to Lindisfarne? Its design has been attributed to Lutyens, but the evidence from Munstead Wood can now perhaps help to sort out the provenance of this interesting object and reveal more about the connections and artistic exchange between people in Jekyll and Lutyens' network. And this is just one of many examples of the queries and discoveries that have been prompted by our research at Munstead Wood. And the house and the garden do continue to reveal their secrets. This is only just the beginning. We hope that the acquisition of Munstead Wood will be the catalyst for all sorts of new research on both Jekyll and Lutyens, as well as the wider context of architecture, gardening, and the arts and crafts. So I'm going to hand back now to Katherine to share a bit more about what we've been up to since acquiring Munstead Wood and to outline some of our plans for the future.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Robin. So we've had to move quickly to secure Munstead Wood, but since then we have made a conscious decision to take our time to really understand what we've brought into our care. And Caroline has quite literally been around the world, virtually, if not entirely physically, researching Munstead Wood, Jekyll and Lutyens. And on the screen you can see some of the archives she's been exploring. We've been working with a small team of volunteers to review primary and secondary sources, including those at the University of California, Berkeley, the Surrey History Centre, various museums, all to expand our knowledge and understanding. Munstead Wood is probably one of the most well-documented gardens in the world, so there's a huge amount to get through, on top of then all of the rich architectural archive information as well. But with every document read, every scrapbook reviewed, we learn something. Next slide. In addition, we've been undertaking a whole range of research engagement, from welcoming specialist groups through to speaking with former gardeners, undertaking oral history work, attending and speaking at conferences, and also undertaking a whole range of site surveys, from simple topographics, veteran and notable tree surveys, ecology baseline assessments, archaeological surveys, and even photogrammetric surveys, all of which builds on our understanding of what we've brought into our care. Next slide. And that work has provided us with our first conservation management plan, our statement of significance, and so much more. Next slide. But it's not just about research and knowledge, it's about people. We spent 2 years listening to people. Over the last 2 years, we have engaged over 30 different organisations, ranging from the Royal Horticultural Society and the Lutyens Trust through to the Gardens Trust and the Victorian Society. We've spoken with local councils and government, local heritage centres and museums, community groups and special interest groups. We've invited over 2,500 individuals to join us for workshops, focus groups and feedback sessions. Our neighbours, garden designers, gardeners, architects, Jekyll specialists, Lutyens specialists, and many, many more. And all of that activity has been in the service of determining, well, what should Munstead Wood be? How do you open it physically? Yes, but also virtually, intellectually, and emotionally. And how do you do so in a way that is completely true to its legacy? Next slide. To get to this, you need a spirit of place. If your statement of significance is all the facts and the figures, a spirit of place is more the heart and the soul. It's a shared understanding and distillation of the enduring qualities that make a place special. Next slide. So significance and understanding combined have given us the local context for our decision making. We are looking to be innovative and work differently. We aren't looking for Munstead Wood to be a typical National Trust visitor attraction. And through working with others, we have adopted these 5 themes that you can see on your screen. They've guided our future and continue to do so. Those themes exemplify the powerful relationship between Jekyll and Lutyens, and through working together, they made one another better. They were both creative and innovative, worked well in partnership, and were both extraordinarily influential in their fields. Is there a greater partnership in the arts and crafts? So our future is to restore and reimagine Munstead Wood as a vibrant space for curious minds to explore gardening, spark creativity, and grow together. The house will be gently adapted to create spaces for workshops, lectures, and seminars focusing on gardening, garden design, decorative art, and architectural history. There will be apprenticeships and learning opportunities for people of all ages, as well as a leadership program focused on creativity and generative ideas. A dedicated studio apartment in the house will offer opportunities for students and scholars to stay at Munstead Wood and truly immerse themselves in the atmosphere. We will have a dedicated media suite for creating high quality content so people can access Munstead Wood anytime and anywhere. In the garden, the barrow store will be converted into a small maker studio, ensuring that artisans can continue to practice craft skills at Munstead Wood. And we will create a dedicated learning space in the garden, offering opportunities for young people to discover gardening, but also grow skills and confidence. We're already building partnerships with one local charity offering social therapeutic horticulture to 11 to 18-year-olds, and another charity that helps 14 to 18-year-olds grow skills in woodwork, metalwork, and conservation craft. Next slide. But to achieve all of that, there is some work to do. We need to improve access to the site. The current track, not fit for purpose. We need facilities for the garden team, including space to host apprenticeships and student placements. The glass houses need significant repair. We'd love to have dedicated learning space for those young people programs and somewhere for a custodian to live. And we need to do sensitive adaptations to the house to provide some space for workshops, research and overnight accommodation. Next slide. And beyond that, there are the opportunities for conservation and restoration of this precious house and garden. Whilst the house remains full of original features, there are some things that don't quite chime. Crystal windows from the 50s, the fireplace that Caroline mentioned, the turning circle and roundabout at the front of the house, which really doesn't reflect the original setting, not to mention the 1970s swimming pool. Next slide. We've got a lot of work to do. And we need to do, on top of all of the work, we need to raise all of the funds. We used our own money to buy Munstead Wood, and we do not have the funds to do all of we want to on our own. But I'll leave you with a final thought. From small places, big things can happen. From these 15 acres in Surrey, Jekyll became one of the most influential figures in horticulture. From those same 15 acres, Lutyens went on to become one of Britain's most celebrated architects. We're excited about the journey for Munstead Wood's future and do hope you'll join us in making it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant.
So I think it's Q&A time. So we've got a question from Ewan Easton. Thanks also for everybody for attending this webinar. Great to hear that the Lutyens Trust America members have had a chance to visit Munstead as the National Trust project takes shape. Is there any possibility of an equivalent event for those of us who are members of the UK Trust?
I'll take that one. I'm sure there absolutely is. So we're in regular touch with Lutyens Trust in the UK as well. And I'm sure Debbie would be delighted to coordinate something. The door is open.
Fantastic. Robert Orr asks if a recording of this session will be available. And yes, after about a week or so, we post our webinars on our YouTube channel, which is Lutyens Trust America. You just go to YouTube and type in Lutyens Trust America, and then all our webinars come up. I can't remember the exact tally, but we've done a lot. Is it 40 now?
We've done 41, and they're also posted on our website, lutyenstrustamerica.com.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody who's contributed to all the other webinars. A question from Anne Gray. Could you comment on the inseparability of house and garden? Is it an English tradition? When did it start? Or did the idea occur organically in the evolution of domestic architecture? Was it part of Victorian era? Did Lutyens always site his houses that way, or did the garden layouts follow after his design was set? So a couple of questions there.
Yes, I'll try and respond to them. Yes, well, I mean, Munstead Wood is unusual in that the house, the garden was conceived well before the house. So it's a sort of a bit of a backwards example, but within the scope of garden history, sort of British houses and gardens, then the garden is usually created to match the house. So if you think of the big sort of grand parterres in 16th century houses, they were to provide a setting for the architecture. And it's only really when we get to the 19th century and sort of towards the end of the 19th century with arts and crafts ideas that this idea of blending house and garden came more to the fore. And arts and crafts houses are definitely conceived with the garden as part of the whole. One is indivisible from the other, and there's lots of indoor outdoor spaces, porches and summer houses and conservatories. So Jekyll's sort of part of that tradition. But the fact that Munstead Wood, it was a good 15 years when she started gardening, and then she got Lutyens to design her house, and within certain parameters, she'd left a gap, so you had to pop it in there. So it is amazing that Munstead Wood house and garden do blend together so well. And I think a reflection of the way Lutyens was responding to Jekyll's requests, the way they were working together on that to make it work, because you'd never think that he was restricted from an existing site. And as for the second part of the question there about the gardens that Lutyens and Jekyll were designing together, Lutyens was obviously designing the garden to continue from the architecture of the house, and the designs are very distinctive. The steps and paths and use of geometry and interesting curves and angles and things, which then Jekyll softened with her exuberant planting. So the way they worked together really created something that nobody else had conceived before. So I don't know if does that really answer the question. Hopefully that gives a little bit.
Yeah,
of,
I think
of
so.
a,
Yeah, I think you did.
Well, and it's
answer.
also very similar that they both felt you should have a quiet introduction to the house and then save the really magnificence of the garden is more for the back and the sides as you progress through the house.
Yes, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to try to get that entrance, the turning circle and everything that we have at Munstead Wood back to the original, because as you say, it was a sort of theatrical experience. The quiet outside prepared you for what you'd see inside. So yeah, very true.
That's great. Well, and Grace says yes, thanks to her question being answered. Chris Towley, I'm not sure how you pronounce your last name, but hopefully I didn't mess it up too badly. Gertrude Jekyll seems to have had an interest in Eastern influences. What more is known about that aspect of her interests?
Well, I think this trip she had to Algiers when she was in her 20s, sort of late 20s, I think by then, and that did seem to be quite formative in terms of the sort of things she saw there. She was there for a few months over the winter, and I think part of the reason for her going was to immerse herself in a different culture. So she was doing a bit of plant collecting, but she was also seeking out sort of peasant woman to teach her embroidery techniques of the local crafts, and she was doing a lot of metalwork, some quite unusual niello and different sort of ancient craft techniques. She was building up skills in these things, and I think she was also going to bazaars. She was collecting lots and lots of stuff, ceramics and metalwork, and I think bringing these things back to Munstead Wood, she wasn't actually at Munstead Wood, but eventually they came to Munstead Wood. So I think there's a lot of that, the sort of Isnic, those tiles that I showed you have that very Isnic, there's tiles at the V&A that Jekyll may well have seen that are very similar. So I think it was just part of a whole broad sort of magpie approach that she had, picking up inspiration from different cultures. And that scrapbook that I've talked about, it's just a distillation of all the things, all sorts of things that she was interested in. That's just the Eastern influence is just one among many, but I think stems from that traveling that she did.
Her plant choice, she uses a lot of Mediterranean plants, probably came from that travels as well.
Yeah, and great for her sandy soil at Munstead Wood. These plants were ideal for growing there. Yeah.
And we have time for one final question from John Breton. Hi both, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Is there any thinking about doing more engaging with Jekyll's work at the other National Trust places she influenced? Will there be a widespread Jekyll boost?
Oh, we're defo up for a widespread Jekyll boost. We should definitely do that. Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that we do know with Munstead Wood is that I don't think we will ever be able to accommodate the volume of people who potentially might want to come and see Jekyll's own home and garden. And so we're really keen to work with, yes, the other Jekyll gardens that we have within the National Trust. And I know, for example, Barrington are looking at doing some restoration work on their own Jekyll garden at the moment. But also, as Caroline Caroline said, we're just at the beginning of the research here. So one of the things we would also, I think, love to do is then actually think about perhaps a sort of a touring exhibition or something where actually we can show how Jekyll has influenced other gardens that we care for that are not our own. Because actually Miss Jekyll's principles and aesthetic ideas are really the forerunner to the modern English garden. You know, her ideas and approach are still in the DNA of how we garden today. So we would love to shed more light on that and help recognise just how extraordinarily influential she's been.
That's fantastic. Well, I really hope that happens. So I think we're at the end of our webinar. Thanks to everybody who's been attending. Thank you, Katherine and Caroline, for being such amazing presenters. And please join as members of the Lutyens Trust America and also the Lutyens Trust if you're in the UK. That would be very helpful and supportive. And also feel free also to donate to Munstead Wood to make this project thrive into the future. Thank you so much for attending.